Today is Thursday. It's the 30th of January, 2025. In today's talk, first I want to speak about the spirit of Metta, or the attitude of Metta. Then I want to say a few words about Metta as a relational practice. And the big bulk of this talk deals with metta as a verb, or the fact that metta must also be expressed in physical actions, in deeds, and in speech. I want to begin with a quote from a Tibetan Buddhist master who had said, "Each morning, our first thought should be to dedicate the day for the welfare and happiness of all sentient beings." In other words, this is a metta attitude. And as Sayadaw Sealeviranyani and myself have said again and again, metta is the wish for the happiness and well-being of all living beings. And this benevolent wish for the welfare, for the happiness of all beings can be expressed in various ways. For example, may all beings be well, happy, peaceful. Or it could be, may all beings be free from danger and harm. Or may all beings live at ease and in peace. Or a wish like, may all beings be free from all kinds of suffering. Or, as a last example, may all beings be safe and protected. Sayadaw has written a book on the practice of metta, cultivation of loving kindness, and how it can serve as a base for the Vipassana meditation practice. He has written this book in Burmese quite some years ago, and I have translated this book into English and also into German. And there, in his book, he describes what metta is and what it is not. He calls it the spirit of metta. We could say the attitude of metta. So I want to read what Sayadaw has written. The spirit of metta is the wish for the welfare and happiness of all living beings. It is never a wish for anything that is not beneficial. In the spirit of metta, we always work for the benefit of other living beings. We never work to create unwholesome results or to inflict suffering. The spirit of metta is always and forever peaceful and cool. It never burns. The spirit of metta is always loving kindness. It never turns to hatred. The spirit of metta is always soft, gentle, and subtle. It is never rough or harsh. The spirit of metta sees and looks at the good side. It does not look for faults or shortcomings. The spirit of metta is always forgiving. It is not oppressive or controlling. The spirit of metta works for the benefit of others. It doesn't work for our own selfish benefit. The spirit of metta is free from entanglement. There is always independence. So this is quoted from Sayadaw's book on the practice of loving kindness. I think it is very important to note that with the practice of loving kindness, we do not approve of an unwholesome deed that somebody has done to us or another person. So when somebody else has emotionally hurt us or even inflicted physical suffering on our body, with the attitude of metta, we do not say that this was right or that it was justified. Not at all. But based on metta, we try not to react with anger or hatred and therefore close our heart for this other person. And if no anger or aversion arises, then our heart is not closed, our mind stays clear. And so when seeing clearly the situation, then we can decide on a course of action that is not based on anger and aversion, but that is based on understanding and wisdom. So when we are hurt or blamed or caused any suffering, we still can and should take action. But with metta, it comes from a different place. It comes from a different inner attitude, namely that attitude which is not based on aversion, anger, hatred, but that is based on understanding and wisdom. So, as we know, pure and genuine metta is not dependent on any conditions. Therefore, it's unconditional kindness or love. Metta does not select beings according to what they have done or what they have not done. Metta does not expect anything in return. This means that our ability to be loving and kind must be truly unconditional. It must be limitless. It should be boundless. Metta is a great power of our heart and mind to stay present and connected with ourselves and others. To stay present with this benevolent attitude in regard to all living beings, ourselves included. Mahatma Gandhi called this most powerful and called this the most powerful and the most subtle force in the universe. And in describing his spiritual unfolding, Mahatma Gandhi had said, I hold myself to be incapable of hating any being on earth. By a long course of prayerful discipline, I have ceased for over 40 years to hate anybody. I know this is a big claim. Nevertheless, I make it in all humility. So, practice of metta, loving kindness, friendliness, this is a practice dealing with other living beings. And as you know, and you have heard it many times now, the wish for the happiness and welfare of all living beings. And this also holds true for the other three Brahmaviharas, for compassion, for sympathetic joy, and for equanimity. These four Brahmaviharas, they are all relational practices because they all deal with living beings. It's all about our relationship with these living beings. So loving kindness, metta, is always relational. So it is an attitude that relates to living beings, relating ourselves to others. And as you know, in the systematic practice of metta meditation, we start with ourselves, then we move on to other people, other categories of people like benefactors, then dear persons, close friends, then neutral persons, and then persons we dislike or hate or consider to be our enemies. And from there, we open up to groups of beings, and lastly, to all living beings. The Buddha didn't get tired to say how beneficial a metta attitude is and how beneficial it is to be kind, friendly, and loving. And even if it is only for one moment. Here is a passage from the scriptures. It's from the Itivuttaka, where the Buddha had said, if one shows kindness with a clear mind for living beings, even once, by that one abides in a wholesome state. So very often the word metta is used as a noun. So we have translations like loving kindness, benevolence, friendliness, or unconditional love. And as you know, with the practice of metta meditation, we develop this quality of kindness in our heart and mind to make it strong. And with that, eventually the power of this metta attitude becomes really strong. And then, even if the metta has become really strong and powerful, but then the work is not yet finished. Once attained, once a very strong and pure state of metta is attained, it's not yet enough. It's not something then that you can tick off the list. Done. What is next? Metta is something we must constantly engage in. We need to manifest it with all our being, in all our actions, in whatever we do, in whatever we say. Buddha also used the word metta as a verb. And this emphasizes the fact that loving kindness is something you have to do or something you have to engage in. Like in this verse that I just read, I repeat it, it says, if one shows kindness to other beings with a clear mind, even once, by that one abides in a wholesome state. So here it is said, if one shows kindness. So to show kindness, that's a verb. Or we must enact kindness, or we must manifest kindness, or we should be kind, or we should be friendly. When we do the cultivation of metta, then the kindness, the friendliness needs to be directed towards a person, a being. This we know. Although another being, another person is the object of our metta meditation, it is something we must cultivate in us, in ourselves. We simply take this other person, this other being, as the object of our metta meditation so that we can cultivate this quality in ourselves, in our heart and mind. And metta, kindness, this is not just an idea. It is not just an intellectual thought, but it is a living entity, something we experience. You know, during this past week that you have been here and practicing metta meditation, you have surely come to see the difference between just thinking a thought of loving kindness and actually experiencing this benevolent, friendly quality in your heart and mind. So there is a difference between, repeating the words and then actually experiencing this quality of metta. But as you also know, repeating the phrase, these words, is a helpful tool to come to that place where we actually are in contact with this quality of loving kindness. So the metta phrases, the words, serve as a base for the practice. Buddha had said that there is nothing that changes as rapidly as the mind. And we know this. The mind can change very swiftly from one thought to another, from one object to another. The mind can change very swiftly from a wholesome state to an unwholesome state. It can shift from being generous and open-hearted to aversion and close-heartedness. And you might have experienced it in this past week. There has been metta present, and yeah, you notice it, acknowledge it. Metta is present. Maybe thinking how nice, how good, and then all of a sudden, whoop, an angry thought pops up. So out of the blue, in half a second, metta is no longer present in the mind, but instead there is dosa. And so, even if we have just one moment of metta in our heart and mind, then we have ennobled our heart and mind with something beneficial, with something wholesome. And with this one moment of metta in the mind, we have reduced one moment of anger in the mind. Because when metta is present, in that very moment, there cannot be any form of dosa, ill will, aversion, hatred. So even if you might think that just one moment of metta does not really make a difference, it actually does make a difference, and a greater difference than we may think. Each moment of loving kindness is actually very powerful and can have far reaching effects. I think we have all experienced times when we were caught in negativity, when everything seems to go against us. And in such moments, it seems to be so difficult or even impossible to think a kind thought. At such a moment, we cannot think or reflect on one good reason why anyone should deserve our kindness. Even though it seems almost impossible, we should try anyway. Can we just think kind thought, a metta thought for a person we usually respect? And this metta thought might not be from the deepest place in our heart. However, already the intention to think a kind thought is turning the mind in a good direction, is turning the mind in a wholesome direction. And so, even if it's just for a brief moment, it will have transformative effect upon the heart and mind. This will help change the dynamic of our heart and mind. And this really makes a difference. And so, in this way, we can start to get out of negativity. Now, I'm going to talk about the three levels of metta. And the three levels of metta are metta in deed, metta in speech, and metta in thoughts. And, one of our metta chants is exactly about this: metta in deed, speech, and thoughts. The Buddha had said that everything originates in the mind. Therefore, we need to deepen and strengthen our metta in the mind so that this benevolent, friendly attitude becomes deeply rooted in the mind. But then, this loving and friendly attitude must translate into kind actions and into kind speech. What would be the point of cultivating metta on the level of the mind when our actions of body and speech would not be informed by metta? So these three levels of metta are, I also say, the Pali expressions for those who can make sense of this. So the first level is Ariya Kamma Metta, Metta expressed in physical actions, or metta expressed by the body. The second level is vachi kamma metta, metta expressed by speech, by words. And the third level is mano kamma metta, metta expressed in the mind as thoughts. So here in our metta meditation practice, we develop metta in the heart and mind. We develop it on the mental level with the help of the silent metta phrases. And so, with this practice here in this retreat, we try to make this metta quality really strong and powerful in our heart and mind so that it becomes deeply rooted. And we try to make it a new habit so that the natural tendency of the heart and mind is to dwell in metta and not in anger, aversion, or whatever. So some words to Ayakama metta, metta expressed by body, by bodily actions. So the metta in our heart and mind must translate into metta-based actions, physical actions. A meditator who had done one of these metta retreats in Burma, she had reported in her last interview that after almost 1 month of metta practice, the metta had become quite strong and firm. And then she tried to explain that this strong metta was actually quite gentle and soft. She said, it's just this gentleness. And she added that it felt like having round edges. So then this gentleness, this metta, when it is deeply rooted in the mind, then it naturally manifests in gentle and soft metta actions and also metta speech. It is important to understand that this gentleness or this softness does not mean weakness. Not at all. It is gentle, but it is a firm power. In the Metta Sutta, what we also chant sometimes in its English translation, it says, whether standing or walking, sitting or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. So if we want metta to become a sublime abiding, a Brahmavihara, then we must embody this friendly and kind attitude in all the time, in all the postures. So here I want to share an example of a quite ordinary person who expressed his kindness in a physical action. And then this kind and loving action had quite far-reaching effect. It's an event that happened to Palestinian man who was in an Israeli prison. But this happened already many years ago. It's not just from the recent events that is happening in Israel and Palestine. So this Palestinian prisoner, his name was Bassam, and he said, in prison we made belt buckles from coffee cans. One of the guards, Maya, was very simple. He was an Israeli guard. And he was told not to talk to anyone of the prisoners, and especially not to me, because I was considered to be dangerous. But Meir wanted a belt for his sweetheart, and he wanted that on this belt was written, Meir loves Maya, and he wanted it written in Hebrew. So I ordered my fellow prisoners to make a very nice belt. And the others were surprised to be making a belt for an Israeli, and even in Hebrew. But they did it because they trusted me, because I was their chief. When it was finished, Meyer laughed the belt and said to me, "What do you want me to bring you in return?" And I said, "Hmm, nothing, just a very small gun, please." He laughed and said, "Come on, seriously, what do you want?" I didn't know what to ask for, so I asked my fellow prisoners what they wanted. They were all young men, and they said they really wanted to drink Coca-Cola. Can you imagine? All they wanted was a Coke. That was all. And so I told Meyer, and he brought 2 large bottles of Coke and hid them in a water tank. So then I made sure everyone got a sip of Coke. So that day, 120 prisoners got a sip of Coca-Cola. They never forgot it, and they said that it was one of their best days in prison. Here we see a little act of kindness, how far-reaching the benefits of this can be. And here is another heartwarming story. My friend back in Switzerland, her name is Maria Anna, had told me that some time ago she had this wonderful and surprising experience in a supermarket. At the cash out counter, she realized that she didn't have the credit card in her purse and she didn't have a lot of cash. She had done quite a lot of shopping and it came to about 140 Swiss francs. So she looked again through her bag, but she couldn't find her credit card. And so the woman behind her in the queue stepped up to my friend, took out her credit card, and said that she would pay the bill, saying that my friend could reimburse her later. My friend was very surprised about this unexpected help. And because she was actually quite in a hurry, she wanted to go home to take care of her sick partner. She gladly accepted the offer of this woman. So the kind woman paid, and then she she simply gave a card with her name and address to Maria Anna. This woman, she didn't ask for any identification of Maria Anna, like a name or telephone number or address, nothing. Of course, a few days later, my friend Maria Anna, with a nice bunch of flowers, went to that woman, gave her back the money, gave her the flowers, and thanked for her help. And then Maria Anna asked this woman why she didn't ask for any information about her. And the woman replied that she trusted in the goodness in people. And then the woman added, otherwise, this world would be such a poor place. The second level of metta is Vachikama metta, metta expressed by speech or words. And, metta infused speech is, of course, also speech that is true, that is beneficial, or metta infused speech is, of course, free from hatred, anger, or aversion. Or metta infused speech is, as we know from the chant, is sweet, beneficial, and pleasing to hear. Or metta infused speech conduces to understanding, to harmony, to a peaceful living together. Our speech, our words, they also have a tremendous impact on others and also on ourselves. Because usually in our day-to-day life, we speak quite a lot. It has become such a habitual action. And so often people are not really aware when they are speaking, not really aware of what kind of speech they use. And that's why very often, people fall into their habits using harsh, abusive speech, angry speech, harmful speech. Again, here comes an example of how kind and loving speech was really beneficial and could prevent a massacre. This happened in 2013 in a school in Georgia, in the USA. A young man burst into the office of the school with an assault rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition. And he wanted to commit killing spree. The secretary who was in the office stayed very calm when he burst into the office. She didn't panic, and she just started to talk to this young man in a kind way. And she was able to calm down this young man. The secretary kept telling him that she was understanding his desperation. And she said, last year I wanted to kill myself after my husband had left me. But look at me now. I'm still working and everything has turned out okay. We all go through bad times. And after a little while, then the young man said, Yes, but nobody loves me. And so the secretary told him, but here, look, I love you. So finally, the secretary was able to persuade the man to give up. She told the young man where to put his gun and ammunition, and she assured him that everything would turn out fine. And she told him, you know, I am so proud of you. It's so good. You give up. Don't worry. We all go through bad times. When the young man had burst into the office, she had been able to press the button for alarming the police. And eventually the police arrived. But by that time, yeah, the young man had given up and no casualties happened. Nobody was killed. Thanks to the kind speech of this secretary. Another inspiring story, what kind and beneficial speech can do, is this one. This is from an Israeli meditator in Jerusalem. Many years ago, I had been teaching in Israel a couple of times. And she had told me she had made it an essential practice to use her speech in a way that did not add more harm and hate to the world. And she told me that usually it doesn't snow often in Jerusalem, but when it does snow, then everything slows down. Then there is traffic jam. And so on that morning, when it had snowed, this meditator didn't get the newspaper delivered to her house. And so she waited and hoped that later on it would be delivered. But by mid morning, it was still not there. So she called office of the newspaper to ask whether it would still be delivered or not. So the person who answered the phone said that she, the Israeli meditator, was the first person on the phone that day who wasn't angry at the person at the phone. You know, everybody complaining, why is it the newspaper not delivered? And so then the meditator told the woman on the phone that she had made a commitment not to add any more hate to the world, that there was already enough. It's a beautiful example of what difference metta-based speech can make. So the Buddha once told Venerable Ananda that bodily acts of loving kindness create love and respect, that they conduce to cohesion, non-dispute, concord, and unity. And likewise, the Buddha continued, verbal acts of loving kindness create love and respect. They conduce to cohesion, non-dispute, concord, and unity. And likewise, the Buddha said, mental acts of loving kindness create love and respect. They conduce to cohesion, non-dispute, concord, and unity. So as I have said, if the heart and mind is really full of metta, then the actions of body and speech will also be infused with metta. Then they will become metta actions and metta speech. The third level of metta is the mano kamma metta, metta expressed by thoughts or in the mind. Even though we cannot see or touch or smell another person's metta on the mental level, it's a great and transformative power. You know, a strong metta person with very strong metta embedded in their mind um, that can have far-reaching effects, transformative effects on others. Again, here is an example of such a strong metta attitude. And it's an example of an Italian monk who walked all the way from Italy to India. And this was in the 1940s. His name was Venerable Lokanatha. So when he was walking through Turkey, he was somewhere in the countryside, and somehow all of a sudden, almost like out from nowhere, came a group of bandits. They surrounded him and they told him to give them his money. But Venerable Lokanatha, he didn't carry any money with him. He just had his robe, his alms bowl, and not much more. So he told them, I have no money. But of course, the bandits didn't know he was a Buddhist monk and should not carrying any money. So they said, come on, give us your money. But Venerable Lokanatha said, no, I don't have any money. And then they threatened him, saying if he wouldn't give them his money, they would kill him. And Venerable Lokanatha said that this was okay, but they should give him 10 minutes so he could say his final prayers, saying that he was a religious person. And the bandits allowed him to do so. Venerable Lokanatha sat down on the ground, started to do his prayers, and the bandits were standing around him to make sure he would not run away. And so Venerable Lokanatha, his prayers consisted actually of cultivating loving kindness, also for these bandits. And Venerable Lokanatha's metta, within a short time, became very strong, very powerful. It was really this pure wish for these bandits and other beings to be happy and well. And this caused that these bandits started to soften, that their hearts started to melt. And when the 10 minutes were finished, Venerable Lokanatha got up and said that he had done his prayers and that they could do with him what they wanted. But now the bandit said, oh, we can't kill you. You are a religious person. Please continue your way. So although metta is invisible, cannot be seen or touched or smelled, but it has a tremendous force. So metta must be cultivated and manifested on all three levels: metta in deed, metta in speech, and metta in thoughts. Even if one would attain the highest jhanas, absorption, which can be attained through the practice of metta meditation, this would not yet be enough. Practice would not yet be complete. Only when the metta shines forth from our whole being in all situations and all circumstances can we say that our metta practice is complete and perfected. I will end this talk with a quote from Acharya Buddharakkhita. He was an Indian Buddhist monk. He died some 12 years ago. He was also a writer, and he had established the Mahabodhi Society in Bangalore, and it has branches in other parts. Anyway, that's what he said. If the quality of metta is sufficiently cultivated through metta bhavana, the cultivation of loving kindness, the result is the acquisition of a tremendous inner power which protects and heals both ourselves and others. I thank you for your kind attention. So may you all be able to peacefully, calmly continue with your practice.